Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at security in AWS. So we've already looked at security of AWS. We've already looked at the shared responsibility model. Let's look at security in AWS. What controls can we put in place to make sure our AWS environment is secure? And I want to point out a quote by Bill Murray, not the actor, but he was is a senior manager at AWS security programs. And you can get the slide that he did for a slide share link down below. But he was basically saying we strive to make security at AWS as familiar as what you are doing right now. And by what he means, but in terms of what you're doing right now, he's talking about inside your own on-premise data center. And he basically lists these four controls. He says you need to have visibility, auditability, controllability, and agility. And I wanted to add a couple more to those controls. So we've got visibility, auditability, controllability, agility, automation, and scale. So let's go through and see how we can achieve security in the AWS cloud across these 6 different control points and what services can give us help in doing this. So the very first one is visibility. So what can we use to see what assets you have? And I don't know if you've ever come from an infrastructure background, but I used to go into organizations as a solutions architect, and I would say, okay, give me a list of all your servers and infrastructure. Let me see your configuration management, or let me see your asset register. And a lot of organizations, and I'm talking even like Fortune 500 companies here, would just have no idea. They're like, well, we don't really know what we've got inside. There is a list somewhere, some sort of spreadsheet floating around, but it's never kept up to date. And that can be a big problem, because if your main production web server is not regularly being patched, you're going to have some kind of incident at some point in time. So in terms of what AWS services we can use AWS Config. So AWS Config allows us to discover our entire assets within AWS. So the best way to understand AWS Config service is to actually go ahead and use it. So we go into services. It's not actually under security, it's under your management tools. So it's in here, and go ahead and click on that. And then we get the standard landing page. And basically it says it provides an inventory of your AWS resources and a history of configuration changes to these resources. You can use AWS Config to define rules that evaluates these configurations for compliance. And then you can go in and basically customize your rules and ensure that you've got continuous compliance. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. In here, you set your rules. So I'm going to say all resources, but you could just do a specific type of resources. But I want to do it across my entire account. We then have to specify an S3 bucket where we're going to save the history and configuration files. So I'm going to create a new bucket. They always give you a default bucket, which is called config bucket, and then a whole bunch of random numbers. Now these are default rules. Obviously you can write your own custom rules. So let's just have a look at one. This is ACM certificate expiration check. So what's ACM? Well, this is AWS Certificate Manager. This is the certificate SSL certificate service. So you can either purchase your own SSL certificates or upload your own SSL certificates into this service. And then this rule will basically go in and say, is your SSL certificate about to expire within a certain number of days? And if you've been using the AWS Certificate Manager service, it's going to automatically renew them. So yeah, let's do that one. You can go ahead and read all these different rules. I mean, it's literally everything that you could, pretty much think of. You can see we're viewing page 1 of 9 of the 25 AWS Manage rules. And don't forget, you can write your own as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next, but I've only done one config rule just to keep things simple, and I'm going to go ahead and hit confirm. So it goes in and sets up AWS Config, and then this is going to essentially give me a dashboard, which will allow me to see, any kind of configuration changes within my environment, as well as, every single asset that I have within the environment. So here is my dashboard, and in the dashboard, we can go in and we can evaluate our AWS resource configurations using rules. So we can add our new rules in here. We've already got our rule around SSL certificates. In here, we can click on rules, and you can see it in here. In resources, I can look up existing and deleted resources recorded by AWS Config. And I've just clicked back on dashboard, and now I can see all my resources. So it does take a little bit of time to load, but I can see that I've got 6 EC2 subnets. I've got 3 EC2 security gateways. I can see in here I've got some RDS subnets, and snapshots, etc., etc. So this is great. This gives us a whole overview of our AWS environment, and then it will evaluate any kind of changes to that. I could go in here and maybe delete a subnet that would be recorded, but basically this is what you want it to not only just monitor your environment in terms of its configuration, but also to actively give you warnings when configurations such as things like SSL certificates are expiring. So the next control that we have in terms of making our AWS environment more secure is auditability. So we want to be able to understand who is going inside our AWS environment and then who's making changes to what. And the best way to do that is AWS CloudTrail. So AWS CloudTrail will basically record every single API call that's made within your environment. So the next control we're going to look at is controllability, and how is your data controlled? So there's two services here, AWS Key Management Service and AWS Cloud Hardware Security Module. And there's basically kind of the same service, but a little bit different. So what are the differences between the two? Well, KMS is multi-tenant. So this is where you're going to go in and store all your encryption keys and have a managed service that does that for you, but the underlying hardware is shared with other people. Now, obviously, there are very strict controls. You won't be able to access anyone else's keys in another AWS account unless they give you the express permission to do so. But it is multi-tenant, and a lot of organizations just won't accept that. So with Cloud HSM, that's dedicated hardware to you. It's not shared with any other AWS customer. But for that reason, you do pay a lot more than what you would pay for KMS. And essentially, where you're going to see this in your exam is you might have a question saying something like, you need FIPS 142 compliance. Which service should you use in order to, safely manage your encryption keys? Something like that. And the answer there would be Cloud HSM, because with FIPS 142 compliance, essentially you can't do this on multi-tenant hardware. It has to be on dedicated hardware. So that's the difference between AWS KMS and AWS Cloud HSM. Moving on to agility, and this is all around how quickly we can adapt to changes. And there's a couple of services here that I want to call out. The main one being AWS CloudFormation. So you go in and you have these great CloudFormation templates that you can deploy in any region, and they have to, within the template, have like a bootstrap script that will go in and, let's say, update EC2. You might also want to download some latest security patches for your applications, etc. And then as and when new security patches come out, you obviously want to update those templates to get those new patches. So using things like AWS CloudFormation, we can be very agile in the cloud. Similarly, with Elastic Beanstalk, again, it's a service that Amazon will go in and provision the resources for you as well. So I don't know if you've done my Solutions Architect Associate course, but when we go in and create a WordPress site, we do it all line by line. So we go in and we provision the EC2 instance. We then SSH in, we install Apache, we go ahead and we install PHP, we install PHP MySQL, etc. And then we go in and configure WordPress, and we've got to open up our security group rules, we've got to deploy an RDS instance, etc. There's lots of manual steps. And the problem with doing things manually is if you miss a step or if you do something incorrect, that's going to go out into your production environment. And you don't want to be doing this all the time. You don't want to, every time you have a new customer signing up and wanting you to build out a WordPress site for them, you don't want to have to go in and do this manually. And for a couple of reasons, because first of all, you can do this much quicker using automation. And then the other reason is that, in terms of security, you only need to focus on, if you do automate this using like CloudFormation or using OpsWorks or even Code Deploy, if you automate this, and you do it right the first time, that means every single time after that, you're going to have the same security processes in place. So basically, OpsWorks and Code Deploy operate sort of alongside with Elastic Beanstalk and CloudFormation, but I just wanted to call them out in the automation section. And then we're just going to move on to scale. And this is the great thing about using AWS. The scale of AWS is on your side. And Stephen Quigg from AWS said every customer gets the same AWS security foundations. They all get access to things like AWS VPC, IAM, all the policies within IAM, things like Config Manager that we've just been playing with. And it doesn't doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 500 company or if you are a startup like a Cloud Guru. We have the exact same services available to us as any Fortune 500 company. And that's the great thing about AWS is they hire the best security experts in the world to go out and build these services. And so that's not something that we've had previous access to 10 or 15 years ago. Startups couldn't afford to do that sort of thing. So the scale of AWS is on your side. So some services we haven't mentioned, and these really apply across all controls. So it wasn't easy to sort of pigeonhole them into a specific control, but things like identity access management, things like CloudWatch, and things like Trusted Advisor also help us to secure our AWS environment. So IAM, obviously, you're creating users, you're applying password policies, you're creating multi-factor authentications, groups, etc. CloudWatch is going to sit there and monitor your environment, and you can see any potential breaches, such as you might really want to look at your CPU runtime or something like that, in case somebody has gotten access to your access key ID and secret access key and has gone in and started mining a whole bunch of Bitcoins. And then Trusted Advisor, we're going to cover that off in a bit more depth in this course, but Trusted Advisor gives us, it goes in and essentially advises us on security. It's not just security though, it does other things as well, such as, our budgets, and we'll cover off Trusted Advisor later, but the main thing that Trusted Advisor does is it will warn us if our security groups are open to the world. So if you've left port 22, our SSH port, open to the world, Trusted Advisor will warn you. Okay, so we've come to the end of section 2. You've done really, really well. In the next lecture, we're just going to look at my exam tips, and then we can move on. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.